guys. So have you ever felt like you were just in survival mode or just surviving? If so, this video is going to be a real treat for you. So I have a very special guest. It is Lindsay Mitchell. She is the founder of VitalSide. She has a background in medicine and she helps people with chronic conditions help calm the stress in their brains in order to reduce symptoms. So whether or not you have a chronic condition or not, I believe this can be a very helpful video for anyone kind of working on their mental health and their nervous system. So Lindsay Mitchell, I present to you. How are you doing today, Lindsay?
Thank you for having me, Jessie. I am doing well. It's a beautiful fall day here in Austin.
Awesome. I love it. So I have a question for you. I was going to ask you in person, but I thought, why not on video? So tell us more about you, Lindsay, and your story. Why brain training? It's a very fascinating subject.
Totally, and very, very relevant to where we're at today in 2021. I think we're all doing a component of that right now. So I got interested in brain retraining after I dealt with my own battle with chronic illness. So I was diagnosed with chronic Lyme disease. And I got that diagnosis about 6 months after I was bitten by a tick. Prior to that, I was working as an internal medicine physician assistant. I was traveling. I was a travel PA, and I was exposed to a lot of different things. So I had, the physical trauma. I was exposed to mold. I was bitten by a tick. I had all of these things that kind of culminated in my body. And I also experienced traumatic situations, both mental and psychological, throughout my life in my early childhood. And I tell you that now because what happened is in my early 20s, I had this perfect storm of events occur. And I got to the place where my body could not handle all of the toxic overload, whether it was from environmental toxins or just the trauma that I experienced throughout my life. And that's when everything came to a head and I was diagnosed with chronic Lyme disease. But in addition to that, I had chronic inflammation, chronic pain, daily migraines, anxiety, which I had never really experienced on a daily basis before. And I was sick and I had become a patient, and most practitioners that I would go to said, well, chronic Lyme disease, there's no cure. So you're going to have to live like this forever. And my stubborn, independent mind was like, no, I'm not. This is ridiculous, right? I'm used to being adventurous. I'm used to being, active and strong. And I just don't see that for myself. But it was extremely disheartening, disempowering to get that over and over again. So I kind of extended all of my resources in the Western world of medicine, which I'm trained in, and delved deep into other, modalities, other treatments, other thoughts of medicine. And some of it was really helpful. And, I was able to kind of treat the bacteria, detox, all of these things, but I wasn't seeing changes to my symptoms. And that was huge. I was like, why am I still in pain after 8 months of antibiotics, changing my diet, doing all of these things that was supposed to really get me out of being symptomatic, at least in my mind? I'm still sick and I'm still surviving every single day. So I had read about neuroplasticity on a blog post. Neuroplasticity, the brain, plasticity, neuro is the brain, plasticity is just the ability to change, the malleability of the brain. And I had thought about it and I was like, okay, well, I learned about this in school, like this much information in school. But I never really knew how to apply it. And this specific article on this blog just said, well, when you have a chronic illness, your brain changes. And basically the brain is communicating to the body that there's danger present and you need to respond. So the body responds in symptoms like inflammation and pain, warning you that something else is wrong. Response in anxiety, saying, hey, there's danger present. This is how we respond. to me, all of that made sense. But the premise of the blog post was our brains can get stuck in this negative feedback loop of stress. And so whether you want to call it the chronic survival response, maybe a fight or flight response, we're hearing more about limbic system impairment, which just means that feeling, reacting brain is hypersensitive, overloaded. And what all of this means is that it's communicating a signal to your body that there's danger present and you need to respond. So that even if the threat is removed, the brain can still be communicating to your body that the threat is present. And that's oftentimes why people who do all the treatments, detox, eat all of the right foods, nourish themselves, they're still symptomatic because the brain is still sending that message of survival to the body. So that to me was like this clicking of, okay, this makes so much sense. I have to do something with this. And it was also this really empowering moment for me to sort of start taking healing into my own hands. I was like, I want to be an active part of healing in my journey. I don't want to outsource all of my healing to these people who told me that I wasn't going to get better. Like, no, that's not for me. So that's what I did. And I started to pay attention to my thoughts, my negative belief patterns, who I followed on social accounts, what people talked to me about. I started to become aware of the survival response. And me being kind of a person who's 0 to 100, started just diving into every article, every piece of research, every book that's been written about this, every kind of program that's out there, just learning all the information I could, though it wasn't always easy with the brain fog. But I just immersed myself into this information. And about 8 months to a year after I really committed time to using daily mental exercises to really benefit my physical health, I made a full recovery from Lyme disease. I was no longer symptomatic. I went to Costa Rica. I surfed. I ate like pizza with full dairy and full gluten. I didn't blow up. I had an alcoholic drink and I didn't turn red. I was active again. And that's what I wanted. And that's how I've always kind of lived my life, is doing the things I love, in moderation, and being able to be immersed into my life. So when I recovered, I didn't get back to being my normal self. What I think I became is this evolved self, right? This person with like this huge self-awareness of the nervous system, the physical body, and the connection that we have with it. And when I started to think about working again, and I was kind of working with this integrative practitioner here in Austin, and I had this epiphany of like, we need to talk about this more. In the medical community, nervous system regulation needs to be something that's on the forefront of people's minds, because so many people with chronic illnesses are seeing these practitioners and not getting the results. So I started studying neuro-linguistic programming. I started studying some other techniques that were helpful for me to create a program. And that's when I created VitalSide and, started like going to people's houses for 3 hours at a time, doing these deep dive immersive brain retraining sessions. And one of my first initiatives was just starting to educate practitioners, starting in the Austin area, about limbic system impairment and how this sort of treatment can be an adjunct to whatever else people are doing to support and nourish their bodies. And that's this beautiful combination of success when it comes to seeing changes to the healing process. So I'm just super passionate about it. I've been doing it almost 5 years at this point, and it's just been a wonderful thing to kind of bring to the medical community and people who are really looking for that change.
Yeah. And I can hear your passion as you're speaking. And there's so many points I was like, yes, 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 like jotting down some of the things that really hit me. But I liked how you mentioned sometimes there's that perfect storm, like emotionally things going on that kind of like offsets chronic illnesses or different kind of things we deal with, which is kind of neat. And I feel like with a lot of people with chronic illnesses, it could be so invalidating and you feel like there's nothing you can do, like it's doomed. So kudos to you to be able to be like, there's got to be another way, and being able to pave the way for other people, because a lot of people just think, oh, the doctor said so, my life's going to be this quality for the rest of my life, and it's not always the case. So I love that you explored that and sharing it. My next question is, what is the survival response and how is it linked to trauma? Because sometimes it could be related to trauma.
Yeah, I think that we have a certain definition of trauma. And, I know you talk about trauma, and so your audience kind of hears about it. There's this expanded version of the word trauma. So I kind of mentioned it before or alluded to it. We can have physical traumas, car accident, virus, bacteria, these cancer, right? Traumatic situations that affect our physical body. You named it, emotional trauma, experiences in our life that causes, heightened emotions, mental traumas, psychological traumas. There's all these kind of different labels for trauma. And when we experience a traumatic event, whether that's getting sick with that physical trauma or moving, having a experience where a loved one dies, experiencing abuse as a child. So those are kind of bigger T traumas, but even the little T traumas, meaning the traumas that you may not even quantify or identify as a traumatic situation, but that one time that kid on the playground said that you had knobby knees, and maybe you don't even consciously remember that traumatic experience. The nervous system does. The nervous system remembers these experiences in your life and stores them. So when you have that perfect storm, you may not even know what the traumatic events were leading up to that perfect storm, but it kind of got to this place where the nervous system can't take it anymore. And it's like crying out for help. And it's saying, hey, I'm going to respond in this hyper-inflammatory, hypersensitive way, sending pain messages to parts of your body, sending sensitivity to maybe your gut. So I'll mention, because I know the other part of this question was about specifically the survival response. Now, there's a couple different responses. When it comes to the autonomic nervous system, that's what we really think about when we think about survival. So if you can kind of visualize with me, if you're like a visual learner, you can think of like a traffic light, and there's the red light, right? What do? You stop. So red is the freeze response. And that comes on, if you think about a traumatic situations you've had, a good example is emotional or psychological trauma that's happened, where you felt like something is totally out of your control, and you freeze. You literally freeze and you shrink down or you run away. That's a survival response. The yellow response is fight or flight. That's get out of here, right? Or stay and fight. Then we have the fawn response. That's often a result of trauma, not technically on the traffic light, but I like to mention it. And that's typically when we find ourselves trying to please other people and not really focus on ourselves. And then going back to that traffic light, you have the green light, and that's the growth and repair. Maybe you've heard of rest and digest response. And within these traffic light responses, there's the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system that respond. And what happens is, naturally, as humans, as animals, we are meant to maintain a balanced nervous system, specifically autonomic nervous system, so that we can easily bounce back and forth between the responses when we need to, because humans weren't designed to live in a world of rainbows and cotton candy, although, that's really nice, but we are designed to respond when we need to in order to survive. So that used to be running away or kind of being able to like get our food as kind of early humans, running away from a saber-toothed tiger, like, that was the survival response. And then going back home and being able to eat and access that green light, rest and digest, growth and repair response. And today, that saber-toothed tiger has turned into a cell phone, or has turned into a car stopping short on the freeway, and you have to respond in order to survive. Now, typically, the way we're designed is that we can bounce into that maybe fight or flight or freeze response, even fawn response, and then go home, recalibrate, get back into that rest and digest response, so that in that response, blood flow gets sent to the gut to digest food, our breathing rate slows down, we can breathe, take deeper breaths, we can kind of access that ability to detox, because we actually change our genetic expression when we are in that response. And that's the concept of epigenetics, which is a really cool topic if you haven't heard about it. But we're designed to access that response more often than not. But living in a do culture, do more, go, being exposed to all these different stressors in our lives, it's kind of conditioned us to be in that state of survival a lot of the time. So that can be detrimental to our health, because we're surviving, right? We're not focused on like thriving and relaxing and feeling calm or feeling that mental clarity. We're like, every day is a struggle. We have to survive. And then that's when the health can be impacted. And those are the clients that I typically see. But I think at this point, having this information and having this information be a little bit more trendy than it's ever been, we can take the steps that we need to start recognizing if we're in a state of survival, so that we don't get to the point where we have to have a major health issue to take a step back and say, whoa, I need to think about life a little bit differently. We can start regulating our nervous system now.
Yeah. And I like how you explained to us like what the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system is, because it's something that's really intrigued me recently, like for the past few years, where, parasympathetic is like rest, digest. That's where we heal, right? Like when we're relaxed, when our body can heal.
It can be. So what's interesting too is often people equate the parasympathetic to that rest and digest. It is the parasympathetic rest and digest response, but you have the freeze response, which is actually a parasympathetic response as well. Yeah. So it's just a different branch. So it just means that, that's a survival response, but parasympathetic also has this alternative, that growth and repair response. So it doesn't necessarily mean that sympathetic dominance bad, parasympathetic good. Again, it comes back to the balance that we have to maintain as humans to have that healthy regulation between the two.
Okay, I like that you clarified that, because that's what I was wondering too. Where it's not about like one being good, one being bad, but just having that balance. Yeah. My next question is, how can brain training and neuroplasticity change that survival state for seconds? So you've talked about us being in a survival state. Sometimes it can lead to like different pains or sensitivities in our body. How can brain training and neuroplasticity get us out?
Yeah, so I'll do this, trying to do this with my hands. I'm a very kinesthetic person, so I use my hands a lot. So what's interesting is a lot of times people think that what I do is specific to mental health, but there's this huge disconnect, I think, just in life, just based on, again, our conditioning and what we know, especially just kind of having that Western medical model and then trickling down to learning and growing up in that world. The brain and body are always communicating. There is no disconnection from that. So the way, our thoughts do impact our physical behavior. Our physical behavior does impact our thoughts. They're always in this communication. And I'll give you an example of how that works. So you may have heard of the HPA axis, hypothalamus pituitary axis. So the hypothalamus is located, again, I'm going to use that word, the limbic brain. That's the feeling, emotional, reactive brain. And just to give you a little bit of context, orcas or killer whales have the biggest limbic brains. And if you've ever seen a documentary on them, they're very emotional creatures. They hold grudges, like they're emotional, reactive, like, so that's, we also have a limbic brain. They have the biggest limbic brains out of mammals, but we also have a limbic brain. And again, the emotional, feeling, reactive brain. Well, in the limbic system houses the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus is this huge part of the brain that dictates, okay, what hormones are we going to send to the rest of the body? How is that going to work? So if we perceive danger in our environment through our 5 senses, and all of a sudden we're like, oh, there's something dangerous, right? We pick it up through our 5 senses. The hypothalamus gets this signal of danger and sends a message to the pituitary gland, which is really, really close to the hypothalamus. Now, those of you who are familiar with like hormone regulation know that the pituitary gland is, part of the body that does help to release the hormones to the rest of the body. So that receives a message of stress, of danger. And then the pituitary gland basically sends this message through neurotransmitters, neurochemicals and hormones to the adrenal glands, which sit right on top of the kidneys. And the adrenal glands receive this message of stress. And that's when they produce the stress hormone cortisol. So at the same time this is happening, other neurotransmitters, other hormones are being produced that are saying, oh, wait, there's stress in the body. We need to respond with more stress. So when I say negative feedback loop, basically what happens is the more cortisol production, the more of that response to the hypothalamus, that danger is present. So if we experience fear or stress, we're going to keep producing that cortisol. And it doesn't mean you always have an increased amount of cortisol. What actually happens is you can show up with a decreased amount of cortisol because your body's running out. It's like on this negative feedback loop, constantly producing these stress hormones. And it's this negative feedback loop. That's when you get limbic system impairment, which means you're basically constantly receiving this message of danger. And again, I'll use the example of like, say you have a chronic condition, an autoimmune condition, and you were diagnosed with that. And then you hear every morning, you turn on the TV and keep it on all day and you watch stories of the news and the pandemic, and that increases that negative feedback loop. Your autoimmune condition increases that negative feedback loop. Then maybe you go to therapy and you talk about a traumatic event that happened in childhood, and maybe that increases your negative feedback loop. None of this is bad. I just want to give you examples of how the things in our lives can kind of feed that stress response. And you asked about brain retraining specifically. So what I do in VitalSide is help you to first identify, hey, there are things in your life that are causing this stress response. How can we right now diminish and start to kind of shift those things to communicate a new signal to your body? And what's interesting, I've talked a lot about stress hormones here, but if we introduce a neurochemical or neurotransmitter hormone like dopamine through laughing, right? We may not want to laugh, but what if we kind of laughed? We put on like a laughter yoga video and we laughed for a couple minutes. Well, what that does is communicates a new signal. So even through the vocal expulsion of laughing, the physical movement, you can maybe even stimulate that vagus nerve, sending a message to that parasympathetic, rest and digest. Okay, we're calm. We're feeling a little bit more relaxed. We're getting this new signal. And all of a sudden, a moment in time like that can start to break that stress response. So think about it, that's like a very, very small scale, this like microcosm of what we do in brain retraining. So if we started to use quick tools throughout the day, 10 times a day, we started to use a longer tool that I teach in VitalSide that takes about 15, 20 minutes to run through, we're teaching our brains to break that negative feedback loop, connect with feel-good neurochemicals like dopamine, which ultimately helps us to get in that parasympathetic rest and digest state. And I will end the question with this. We are changing our brains all the time with the things around us, what we do, what we think about, what we choose to pay attention to. All that brain retraining is intentionally changing our brains to benefit our health, our well-being, how we feel. That's it. We're just kind of paying attention to it and choosing to do activities, choosing thoughts, choosing behaviors that actually serve us and make us feel good. And that's all brain retraining is.
I like that. I haven't heard this part of it. So I'm like, okay, like you're basically creating hormones that counteract that stress response to tell the brain, hey, I'm actually safe.
Exactly. In a nutshell.
That's really cool. Now we're going to get a little more practical. So what are some practical tips on recalibrating the nervous system and getting out of that trauma place or that survival place? We talked about like laughing, but what are some other practical tips?
Laughter is a good one. If you're kind of just looking to do something different today, I encourage you to like look at your survival responses. So say if you've recognized that you're in that red light freeze response, thinking about, okay, that looks like freezing up, shrinking down, being small. Maybe you have to go and lie down, right? And go to your room. When you think about whatever your survival response is that you typically respond with, what is the opposite of that? So the opposite of freeze response is kind of like jumping up and moving your body. Maybe that's not possible for you, but you think about something like movement. And again, going back to that vagus nerve, the 10th cranial nerve innervates different organ systems coming from the base of your brain all the way to your gut. And basically, when you stimulate that vagus nerve, it sends a message to that parasympathetic growth and repair response to activate it, and it dims down that limbic brain response that kind of feeds that stress cycle. So anything you can do to stimulate that. Laughing is a good one. Humming is a really great one. I recommend humming the happy birthday song twice over, just and then I'll give you two more. So gargling the alphabet in the shower, putting some water in your mouth and gargling the alphabet can be really great. So I encourage you to kind of do that at night and then kind of lie down and see what the difference is in your body and take note of that. Another great one is one of my favorites, which is just blowing out your lips. So just kind of taking a deep breath in and going for as long as you can. And just kind of doing that 5 to 10 times. I love quick little things that help you to change your state throughout the day. That's just a really great first thing to do to get used to what it's like to shift out of that response. And then after you complete those things, that's when it may be time for more structured tools like that I teach in the Vital Side membership, which require a little bit of extra visualization, breathing, movement, these types of things that are much more structured.
That makes sense. And I know when I watched one of your lives, I was doing the little lip thing with you. It actually makes you feel a little more relaxed after, which I was like, this is cool.
Yeah, some people are like, oh, my lips are like numb or I'm yawning. I'm like, yeah, it's just, that's what happens when you kind of change the facial muscles, change what you're paying attention to, shift your focus. It's really cool.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, I think yawning is a part of your parasympathetic nervous system, like the stress being away, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it's kind of this, yeah, I mean, the reason you yawn, there's many different reasons. Yes, that is one of them. Another one of them is like you're receiving more oxygen to the brain. So you're kind of waking things up in your brain and making that change. So that's a good point too. Pay attention to like how your physical body responds. You know, you could kind of notice a couple different things and it can be kind of fun to pay attention to.
And I'm just going to recap. You said do the opposite of what your response is. So you have freeze. You say be active and do something, which I know for me, my response is automatically freeze. So when I dance, that's something that's really helpful for me. If you had a fight response, what would your opposite, the opposite action be?
Yeah. So if you think fight or flight, run away, the opposite to me of that, and maybe it's different for you or other people, is calm, right? Peace, connecting with that. So maybe that looks like, I always recommend changing where you're at, like literally physically changing your space, walking outside. There's so many benefits to being outside, being in nature, feet on the ground, that kind of thing. But at least changing your environment, what room you're in, and then taking a couple deep breaths. That could be just really great for a minute. Just taking these deep breaths in through the nose, out through the nose. Kind of getting quiet and kind of closing your eyes and connecting with that. And a simple one is also too, if you're not comfortable closing your eyes, with your feet on the ground and kind of breathing in this way, just look around you and name the colors of the rainbow that you see around you. So look for something that's red, right? Is it like a tree? Is it a leaf on the tree? What about orange? So here we're kind of just, again, shifting what we're paying attention to, connecting with the present moment. And I want to make this clear because I think sometimes this gets confused. And I know some people have reached out to me and kind of talked about this and said, hey, like, I feel invalidated because I feel like my trauma is not real. And I think that this is something to get really clear on. Trauma and how you feel about your trauma and the emotions that you have, totally real, totally valid. And I absolutely believe in trauma processing. That's something that I think is a lifelong journey for most people because, again, as humans, we're always experiencing traumatic events. But the idea behind limbic system impairment specifically is that right now you're in a chronic 24/7 state of this survival mode. We're not designed as humans to be in this survival mode. So even if like laughing or kind of naming the colors of the rainbow and stuff that you see around you, even if it feels, difficult and uncomfortable in the moment, you're slowly shifting and showing your brain and body that you can focus on other things. It doesn't mean that crying or yelling into a pillow or doing whatever you need to do to release the emotion isn't healthy. It absolutely is. There's a time and a place that can be beneficial for things like that. We just want to show your body that there is a new reality that can be experienced.
I like that. Just like showing them like little glimpses of what you can have, and then eventually you'll be able to like cultivate that calm when you want. Is that correct?
Yeah. So if you think about it, like, I'm happy to share this. Like, I experienced physical, mental, emotional abuse as a child from a caregiver. That was real. That happened. And yeah, I can easily get, emotional and stressed about it. But what we're doing, if say, I go to a therapy session and I talk about it and I get emotional and I experience that, and then I get out of it and all of a sudden it's like everything around me, I'm like, oh, I stubbed my toe, and oh, I did this other thing, and oh, I'm stressed out, I'm in the survival mode and I'm releasing these emotions and things like that. What if then I was able to do something a little bit differently, right? Go outside, do that technique where I name the colors. And it's basically just showing that this thing happened, but it doesn't have to define how you feel for the rest of the day. It doesn't have to define who you are and your personality. You do have these amazing core values. You do have a purpose. You do have so many other things. But often, and the people that I deal with are mostly people who have chronic illnesses. That's a lot of my clients. It doesn't invalidate that your chronic illness isn't real or how you feel is real. It's what if you've had this chronic illness for 10 years and in 10 years you haven't laughed, you haven't thought about your purpose, you haven't connected with your core values? Well, being in that survival state, that response, it trains us that we can't think about those things because we need to focus on surviving right here, right now. So what we're doing is kind of saying, hey, we see these survival responses, and we're going to train our brains that there are other responses we can experience, even if it's just for little moments in time. So doing something like one of those really quick state changers is just an example of how to do that. Again, in Vital Side, we get more into detail about like, where does that old belief stem from? How can you start to point out old beliefs that dictate your life? Like, I'm sick, I'll never get better, I'm not supposed to heal, these types of things. Because that also triggers that stress response and feeds that stress response. So we can create a new reality. Doesn't mean your pain's not real, doesn't mean that your traumatic event in your life did not happen. It's basically just saying, we can choose to create these small changes to see a little different version of our reality to start to feel better and connect with who we are.
Good, I like that. Which is going to lead me to my next question. How do you, well, actually, I'll give some context to this first. I went to one of your lives when you talked about creating a safe place around you in order to cultivate that inside of you. So can you tell us how to create a safe place around us and some tips on that, and why is it important to create a safe place around us?
So the first thing I'll recommend, and I always, if I'm like talking to someone, they sign up for a live Q&A with me and they want to learn more about Vital Side. One of the first things I actually ask in the survey is like, is your environment safe? Meaning, do you live with an abusive partner or family member, or do you live in a house with black mold? You know, is it deemed safe to maybe like an outsider's perspective? If the answer is yes, then we can cultivate that space. If the answer is no, it's okay, find a way to figure out how to get safety, to kind of seek that shelter that you need, or, you know, get the help that you need to get away from that abusive partner, which is not my specialty, but like, you know, that's very, very important. And I have some good context to help with that.
Could you tell us, sorry, I was gonna say, could you tell us why it's important to get out of that dangerous place and to create a safe place? Just to give a little more context. If people are like, well, why do I actually need to leave? What would your response be?
So again, kind of going back to what feeds that negative feedback loop. So if you are living in a toxic relationship with an abusive partner, what you're not, you know, what you're going to be doing from my perspective is just basically living in that fear, living in that survival response every single day. Same with the idea of living in that mold-ridden house, is every day your body is being exposed to that environmental trigger that's just causing you to stay in that stress, that negative feedback loop. Same with an abusive partner, same with an unsafe environment. And so that is like from my perspective and from my lens. But, you know, of course, if you ask a therapist or psychologist or something like that, the trauma that you experience with your mental, emotional health, of course, that is there also. So, I mean, that's why, from my perspective, that's really important. And then if you look around you and you kind of deem that maybe from an outsider's perspective, this is safe. You know, maybe I live alone and I have a small apartment, or maybe I live with a partner, family, whatever, that, you know, they're here. Maybe they don't understand what I'm going through, but they're supportive. Then okay, then that's an opportunity for you to create even another healing space within your house. So I think probably on that live, what I was talking about is cultivating an environment that helps you to connect with the things that you love, the supportive people in your life, colors that actually signal to the brain changes, you know, vibrancy, joy, pleasure, these types of things. Really connecting with like the soft things. If you're more of a kinesthetic person like me, soft blanket, like nice cushion, you know, even for more of those visual learners, pictures of your most favorite places, or you skydiving in college that, you know, that makes you feel and connect with adventure. And then for the auditory learners, like maybe playing like a song that's soft and soothing that helps you to connect with your space. So creating even like a space in your house with this environment, like maybe in your office, and people say like, oh, I live in a small apartment. I love small houses. I live in a small house. I have a wall on the side of my office that has all my favorite quotes, all my favorite colors, notes from people that I love and clients. And what I do is I just like pull up my yoga mat and I create a little space. And, you know, I've got like my candles and the things that I love in that space. And what that does is it allows you to, first of all, connect with what it's like to experience that sense of safety in your environment, which again helps to trigger that parasympathetic rest and digest, growth and repair response. And then it also helps you to release those feel-good neurochemicals. And you can think dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, endorphins. So whatever practice you're committing to, whether it's VitalSide or a meditation or a yoga practice, whatever you kind of gravitate towards, this is a space for you to do that in a way that makes sense. And I work with a lot of parents. You know, you put a sign on the door that says, mommy's practicing, come back later. You know, you make it a very clear boundary that this is your space. And even if it's for 5-10 minutes, but this is your time where you're focusing on your healing, your nervous system regulation.
I like that. It's really inspirational. That was something that was really inspirational for me to hear. I remember you saying like, if it's like a warm tea that makes you feel like safe and comforted, like take that. That was something that really resonated with me.
Yeah, the hot tea that maybe your dog is there. You know, when you hug your dog, you actually release oxytocin, and so does the dog, which is really, really cool. Like just things like that, the dried flowers, whatever are the things that kind of like spark joy in your life. Bring those into the healing space, even if you have to create it every time. Have a couple things nearby that are your go-to items.
You've kind of inspired me now to like think of a room in my apartment and be like, okay, this is going to be decorated like I want it. It's going to be like something that really makes me feel like safe and cozy, and I like that. So to end off, do you have any last words of advice and how people can find you? And as well, I'm really curious about VitalSide, if you can tell us a little bit about what that program looks like.
Yeah. So first of all, any last words of advice? My advice to you today is, if all this information, if it kind of resonates for you, but you're just kind of nervous to get started, you don't know where to get started, just remember 1% changes a day. You don't have to like tear down your apartment, build a comfy, cozy, like Hoog space today. What you can do is take these small changes, and that's how you make sustainable changes. So maybe today it means spending a minute breathing, and that's it. And maybe tomorrow doing the same thing, and for the next week doing the same thing. Start very small. And if you do, those small changes can turn into larger habits. And then maybe at some point you'll be like, okay, now I'm ready for like, you know, more of that structure. And maybe that's a time where you're like, let's think about VitalSide, right? Like, what does that consist of? So for more information on VitalSide, you can go to vital-side.com. And I'm actually shortly in the next couple of weeks, I'll have a free 7-day brain retraining course that will be up, video course that will be up for people to just kind of try out brain retraining and see what it's all about. And then if you kind of like that, the VitalSide membership is a step-by-step process teaching you about the way that your brain changes, diving into neuroplasticity and how to make those positive changes to your brain. So we go through, again, those structured tools for you to use throughout the day, the longer techniques. We have a community of brain retrainers. We have group sessions. There's just so many wonderful things a part of that. And, you know, the community is just growing more and more and more, which is just really wonderful to see. And then if you're kind of just getting interested in this information, you're like, oh, maybe this is the first time I'm learning about this, either head over to my website, vital-side.com, get some free resources there. I also just post a lot of really informative content on my Instagram at my Vital Side. So you'll see, posts from brain retrainers or just quick tools you can use throughout the day. So that's a really good place to start. And maybe that's your 1% change for the day.
Oh, I love that. And I love that you have a little smaller course coming out for people who kind of want to put their feet in, kind of see if it's something that's for them. So I'm going to take off this so you guys can see that at my Vital Side is where you can find Lindsay on Instagram. If you also look in the description of this replay, you'll find that. You'll also find the website in the description as well. So I guess to finish off, I'll say thank you so much, Lindsay, for coming. I'll see you on the other side when I end this live.
Okay, awesome. Bye-bye.
So thank you. Bye.